So, I should like to state that secular theology as a course has the potential to keep going on indefinitely, of course. Uh, I mean, no matter how we play it, there could be new theories be presented all the time. We've gone over what I think are some of the primary theories or some of the bigger but lesser known theories, more potentially acceptable and logical, rational theories. But there are many different theories, and of course, there are many different religions. There's many different versions of each religion, most especially Christianity. I mean, that's the biggest religion in the world, largely because there's so many different types of Christians, and of course, because it imposed itself upon the entirety of the planet. So, but there are various differing religions and societies and cultures and whatnot to be explored, and we're going to investigate all of the bigger ones, at least the heavyweights, and we're going to investigate everything that's of interest to me, and we're going to investigate everything that you present to me or ask. If you think I missed something, you go ahead and pop it, and we'll get on it. But um, it is for the most part. I mean, given all of that, given the very factor that when dealing with it from the perspective that we intend to deal with it as soul mechanics, as our principal dynamics perspective, our first person spectacle, even every single day, every moment, in fact, that my own personal perspective on the matter differs or changes in any way offers a brand new perspective from which to view it and different lenses through which to examine it. So it has the potential to go on, to the end of time. And honestly, should the initiative be anything lesser than entirely successful, it may very well do just that. But we're going to investigate it surely, firmly, and sternly, and throughout, to the best of our abilities. But it does, in fact, there is the intention for it to come to a conclusion at some point. And we do have to move along with principal dynamics. But of course, principal dynamics and the other courses that are going to be involved here are also intended, or not intended, but required to a certain extent in order to launch this investigation. It's necessary for you guys to be equipped with certain values I intend to provide via those courses in order to investigate this matter properly, or negotiate the investigation, as it were. So there is basically, all I'm saying is there is an intention to bring it to a conclusion at some point. I'm hoping that we reach a common understanding here eventually, but for the most part, we can play around with things as it stands. I have presented my favorite theories and what I think are the most prominent theories insofar as logical rationality is concerned. And I'd like for you to try and bear in mind throughout the course that while you have these options available to choose from, these differing optional theories, uh, to make use of if you wish to, as kind of a backdrop or a foundation for the investigation, any of these theories, they are capable of corresponding. None of them, all of them are capable of coexisting, in fact, as one save one. The only theory, or the only option amongst the theories that is in any way contradictory or stands against or is, not interchangeable or capable of becoming a composite piece of any of the other given theories, let alone all of them, is the one that's commonly accepted by modern day Christians, where the Bible is just what it says it is and we accept it at face value. That is the only uh, hypothetical hypothetical reality in which it doesn't make any sense. Any of these other theories could easily make sense of the entire thing altogether, could make sense out of the whole damn thing, and make religion easily acceptable. Not acceptable as a practice of worship per se, but acceptable as an understanding, as a common knowledge understanding that is shared amongst us as something that is realistic. Any of these theories can make sense of it in that regard, except for the one that is actually accepted by the religious fanatics themselves, the religious peoples. Sorry if calling you fanatics, anybody out there offends you in any way. I'm a fanatic. I'm a theology fanatic, obviously, or I wouldn't have launched this course at all. I'm a big theology fanatic. So, I mean, if you devote your life to the worship of some guy who may or may not have lived, and actually go about suggesting to people that one book solves all the answers, riddles, and that worshiping this one single person is the only method by which you can reach salvation in eternity beyond life and death, I think that kind of makes you somewhat of a fanatic. It's at the very least could be considered a slight obsession. So, I apologize if it comes off as offensive, but that is what you are, a fanatic. If you are, a religious oriented person, if you believe in this religion, you are fanatical. It is just what it means. We're not playing with semantics here. It is exactly what it says. In any case, there are a few bits and pieces that I'd like to clear up before we do move ahead with the investigation in earnest and go ahead with our first person spectacle perspective of it from what we call an onlyness perspective, which we'll get into that, but it's an interesting concept. But there are a few straggling little bits and pieces of theories here and there. One, namely, is the evolutionary theory, wherein and there's two facets of this, two actual differing sorts or types to this theory, two variations, you could say. One of which being the idea that if Earth and this world as it stands, this universe per se, or even just Earth, was in fact the only world that God created, that would thereby make it God's first world, wouldn't it? And so if God were actually actively in the process of creating this world, there's a good chance that God would have had to kind of figure it out and learn his way around his way, its way, he, she, its way around. God would have to have figured, let's call it the he for the sake of composing this as it stands with Christianity. He would have to have learned his way around. He would have had to have matured, had to have figured it out as he went along. And so that allots for God making a lot of the mistakes that are spoken of in the Bible, and they are mistakes. If you're going to say that God contradicting himself, making rules that he himself is unable to oblige, and just generally desecrating everything that he seems to present himself as standing for is not a mistake, then that's got to be an error in judgment on somebody's part. I mean, maybe I'm reading it wrong. I don't know, but and we one of the largest arguments that can be raised and likely is largely raised for the most part is going to be that if God is a perfect being, then why is God imperfect? Of course, who are we? No human entity, no human personality is equipped, obviously, ostensibly, at least, with the values necessary to make an accurate assessment as to what perfection is. And of course, God's ultimate plan could easily be, could justify this idea and perspective of imperfection on our part, where, there's no telling what one death could save however many lives, and what however many thousands of lives, deaths it could take to, amass the synchronicities required to account for a single important life to come into play. There's no telling what perfection is through the eyes of divinity. And of course, that's an argument that can easily be raised, but it isn't evidence of anything, and I'm going to have to lean against that, because it just, again, we want to try to apply human rationality to this, because this is regardless of whether God exists and people are telling God's story, people are telling God's story. This does not come firsthand from God. It never has. It cannot, in fact, by our standards, by our measure. it's not possible for this book to have been literally written by God. So, in fact, it's not even possible, insofar as the scripture is concerned, for God to have told this story to somebody. Even Moses had a fuck ton of trouble talking to God on the fucking mountaintop. Damn near didn't make it, insofar as I recall the story as having been told. But we have to take into account human stupidity and human rationality, human reason, human accountability. Wherein, for example, did but coming back to the evolutionary theory, the one variable of it, one variation, uh, we have to account for the idea that our God, as we created this concept of God, as I just stated. The story is told by people, so it's going to have a human spin on it to some extent or another. Maybe God did make mistakes. Maybe God had to learn his way around. Maybe God had to mature with the world and humanity. Maybe creating humanity was God's first run at creating people, and God had to figure it out and didn't really know what he was doing. That's a possibility. Maybe God matured, and then eventually we have Jesus coming to spread the good news of, hey, guess what? God actually got his shit together. That's a potentiality. Then on the other variation of that particular theory, evolutionary theory, is that God is in fact something that we are in the process of creating. That God is the reason, and this fits with time mechanics. That God is indefinitely, or ultimately, God is inevitably the reason. And we are viewing things in reverse. That the reason exists first, and all of this is an explanation leading up to the creation of that reason, and that we are in fact in the process of creating God. That our very global human psyche could very well be like a fetus in the womb, an egg that has yet to hatch. That's a potentiality. And that's actually what the Remnants of Tomorrow kind of leans towards with our investigation in the psychedelic matters. That we're investigating what lies at the boundary and what intelligence may lie there at the boundary of comprehension. Because we're going to explore the boundary throughout the course, this secular theology course. We're going to explore the boundary thoroughly, and you're going to see how there, regardless of whether you use psychotropics or astral projection or what have you to get there, it's very easily presented through language, in fact, through mathematics, through anything, any sense of comprehension. It's easily presented that there is in fact an intelligence at the edge there, kind of peeking in at us. Something is there communicating. So we're gonna get to that. I want to wrap up before we continue. We got with the two variations of the evolutionary theory. I want to wrap up the what I spoke to in option C, speaking to Prelude to Overture's option C theory, the conspiracy theory, or the political theory, is that also accounts for the previous aforementioned theory before that, option B, wherein we spoke to the ancient astronaut theory. Whether it be aliens from another planet or whether it be some mythological creatures or what have you, that doesn't matter. The case as it stands is taking into consideration that the fall of Lucifer and the angels being cast out was an act of war, that it was a wartime endeavor, that it was propaganda spread about it, that was a political propaganda campaign, that the God character himself was in fact an imposing dictator, a ruler that was regarded as being a god, perhaps demanded the title of God be bestowed upon him, and that he was in fact a dictator, that he was an imposing ruler that was not an actual god at all. He was just like a pharaoh or a king or an alien overlord, whatever he was. He was a lie. Being God and being the creator of all things is a lie. That's not true. That's what has to be regarded in that political theory, leading up to Jesus being an amalgamation of all the world's differing cultures, stories smashed together, mishmashed together. And on that regard, I have to speak to cherry picking as well, because atheists are going to speak to cherry picking as a no-no. which honestly I'd like to agree with them on that. I should like to agree with them for sure. But considering that this ideology, that this religion is going to be imposed upon you, that you're going to run into it, you can't make it through life without it affecting you in some way, you kind of have to cherry pick. You're not really allotted a choice in that matter. I mean, either you can accept it all, you can discard it all, or you can cherry pick. And any way you do that, any way you dice it, you are cherry picking, because in fact it's going to be presented to you at some point. You can't get around that. So it's going to be a presentable facet in your life. These values are in play. If you do not, in fact, use proper judgment to cherry pick what values you make use of or don't, that's a mistake. That would be the only real mistake you can make in here. You can't discard all of it, because there are avenues through it to get to the actual truth. I mean, you could discard all of it if you have no intention of investigating. If you don't care enough to make sense of the matter and actually figure it out, go ahead and discard it all. Pronounce yourself atheist, but for the most part, you wouldn't really be allotted the platform on which to stand against it, because it's not really any of your business anymore at all. Period. So leave the fight up to we who are actually going to win. All you're doing is whining. Sorry. I mean, it's the truth. And I love that the atheists present arguments in this regard, but I mean, honestly, their argument as it stands would have to be regarded agnostic. If you're presenting yourself as an atheist, then this is not your battle ultimately. So, I mean, you can argue with me if you don't think that's the case, fine. And I don't care really, because I agree with a lot of you guys. I'm very happy that you're out there fighting for it. I'm just saying, you can't particularly go ahead and pick and choose what rules apply to it. At the very least, you can't tell religious people they're not allowed to cherry pick. They have to. If they don't cherry pick, then you're pushing them towards just accepting all of it. You're defeating your own purpose thereby. So I mean, that's an inevitability, and it has to be done. And in fact, Christianity being what it is, a mishmash of all the world's different cultures and ideologies, cherry picking is what it's essentially made of, and you have to do that to get through the fucking mess in the first place. It needs to be done. It's not something you can speak against. That's my argument here. Forget what I said about atheists being out of the fight. I want you guys in here. Obviously, you're an excellent ally and you're doing a hell of a job. But just forget about the cherry picking argument. It's not going to work. Much of the way that you're approaching it is not going to work, and for various reasons that we'll get into throughout the course of our investigation. But let's see. I should also like to state that, well, I should go ahead and just reassert that we do have to apply human rationale to this. That there's going to be human rationale involved in all of it. And for example, the theories as I presented them, the optional theories that I presented throughout the course of the Prelude to Overture, precursor to the investigation, uh, those I'm stating as being the preeminent theories, because they make the most logical, rational sense from a human perspective. Now, while investigating God as in reality, investigating a reality of God, a true theistic or theological approach, which, mind you, this is all a theology, a logic. None of this is, nothing's being asserted as fact here. This is just, it's all theoretical. And it has to be regarded as such, most specifically moving into our investigation from an onlyness perspective, because that is extreme theoretical, but may very well be the actual truth. That's going to be up for you to decide. We'll see how that works out for you when we get into it. But until then, ultimately, the theories that I presented make sense to me as being the most logical or rational, because they work from a human perspective. You could expect a ruler to want to be called God and to demand that kind of, and especially the sort of ruler that we see in the Old Testament Bible presenting himself. Mind you, I do have to reiterate, in case I hadn't before, that when we see Jesus pop up later on in the story, Jesus is very obviously speaking of a different person. The God that Jesus is talking about and the God that we see in the Old Testament story are not by any stretch the same person. And in fact, we also have the theory, the smaller theory that can be provided by, say, the Gospel of Judas and whatnot. Ideologies of that in that regard, wherein we have these stories about there being a creation myth regarding an absolute supreme God and the one, and then we have emanations of it leading up to a certain aspect of God, which in fact is the creator of this world, a smaller, lesser version of God that presents itself as God, which would fit with the other theories, obviously, because you could say that an alien or a ruler is an aspect of God, a facet, a piece of God, obviously. We're all one, it's all one thing. So that could easily be said, but in these theories, it speaks to a specific uh, per- personification of God that created this world, that is in fact who created the material world, that is in fact a negative aspect of God, a shade of God, and is kind of like a shitty portion, a bad guy, asshole version of God, which fits. I mean, it fits. And this is from a human, rational, logical perspective that it fits because this is the way that people would behave. We've seen it throughout all history. It's always been this way. It still is this way right now. So, it's just we're looking at what fits from the perspective of, a practical and, quite frankly, a professional human person. That, I treat my job as a human as being very, very professional tasking. In any case, we do have those theories where there's emanations of God, and that in fact in Mormonism we have the same idea that God was, a person that came, which fits into the evolutionary theory. In Mormonism we have the idea that God was a person who was exalted to godhood and was allowed to make his own planet through trial and challenge. Eventually he was allowed to make his own planet. He had to learn how to do it as he went through the process, and he does in fact have facets of himself that were presented via Yahweh and Lucifer, that were opposing sides of that one same person. We have all these different ideologies along those lines, and I'm sorry that I didn't pick up and make a bigger video for them, but I mean, this one's already going on too long, and I was just picking up, clipping off the frayed ends. So I guess we'll approach all of those as we go along. We'll pick out certain ones, most especially where I'll be afforded an opportunity to respond to certain videos that speak to it and present actual evidence that, other YouTubers will have presented for me to use. So, yeah, that's about it to say. I wanted to just clip up those frayed ends and, bring it down to a straight cut for now and make sure that we're all on the same page here. Option C was intended to be regarded as though it was presumed that everything leading up to Jesus was also a scam, that the whole thing is a scam, that religion itself was created, devised by humanity to be a long-term worldwide scam. So that's that. That's all I have to say for right now. That's the video. I hope I didn't miss anything, but I likely did. I mean, obviously, I missed a lot of things before I got here, and that's why we're making this one. But that's my attempt. And like I said, we'll cover everything as we go along. We'll do it just like God likely did, and just make it up as we go along. I've been doing it this whole time, honestly, since before this channel even started, since before any of this started. I've been kind of making it up as I go along, and you know what? It's been turning out pretty bitchin' so far. So let's see where we can take this thing. Let's see how high we can punch it, how hard we can hit that punching bag, how fucking sternly we can press that pedal and floor it. That's what we're going to do here with this. Starting with the investigation, as we launch in the next video, we're going to actually launch the first person perspective investigation and speak not only to religion from that perspective, but speak to that perspective in and of itself, which is really what I want to get across. I don't care about the religion so much, honestly. Religion led me to finding this first person onlyness perspective, and that's the ideology I want to get across. That's what I want to show you guys, is how to view things from that perspective on a regular basis. So that's what we'll get to. Like I said, we're gonna punch it. The next one, sixth gear and running. um, I'll see you guys then. I love you all. Thank you very much for watching. If you did, Kila Salai, Terviuni, Siari Namaste.